am not Matthew Buckley Smith, but you are still listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. Thank you all for listening. Matthew is taking a well-earned break for a month or so, but he is in this episode. My name is Alice Allen. I am one of the co-hosts of this podcast. I also have my own podcast. It's called Poetry Says. It's my job for the next little while to keep the lights on here. This is my second attempt at recording this intro. I think I'm a little bit nervous. I also have to confess to you, I think I might be into chess. This conversation begins with Matthew recapping what's going on in the World Chess Championship that is happening currently in Singapore, and the games between Ding Liren and Gukesh Dommaraju. The drama is amazing. I'm so into it. Before we recorded this episode, Matthew sent me a bunch of videos and I watched a bunch of others, and I think it's happening. I think I'm becoming converted. So we begin with that discussion, and then the basis for the rest of our chat today is an article that I dug up from the New Yorker from May 2023 by a writer called J. Caspian Kang. It's called Notes on Losing. And in this article, J. Caspian Kang has a question: why do I keep playing tennis even though I suck so much? And we use this article basically as a jumping off point. In the process of trying to answer that question, or honestly not answering that question, J. Caspian Kang meets a fellow tennis player who has been roaming the courts for who knows how long, who also happens to be a poet. And this poet has an interesting complaint about the state of poetry in the US today. And thinking about the exchange that they have leads Matthew and I into a conversation really about honesty. The conversations between poets seem, to me at least, to be so often to function through a mutual agreement that we will never be entirely honest with each other. And so what we're kind of digging into here is, how honest can we be in our lives as poets? How honest should we be? The pain that honesty can lead to, and the pain that dishonesty can lead to. There is also a second half to this conversation, which is a bit more intimate, bit more laid back. So I encourage you to go over and listen to that. And the other thing I really want you to do is to send in your questions for our AMA. So Matthew, Cameron, Brian, and I are all somehow going to get online at the same time, and we're going to record a 4-way AMA. And to do that, we really need your questions. So email them through to sleerickets@gmail.com and ask us something personal, something that will embarrass us, something that will challenge us, or just something nice. That's also good. Okay, let's talk chess. I've learned so much in the last couple of hours about the world of chess. And I have news for you, Matthew.
Okay.
I played a game of chess on chess.com.
Did you?
And look,
Wow.
I don't want to freak you out, but I managed to last for 26 moves.
Wow.
And I only made 5 mistakes and 4 misses and 0 blunders. So I might be a genius.
That's truly like, if you lasted 26 moves. I mean, is this your first game of chess?
No, I used to play it as a kid, but I'm looking at this being like, what does that piece do again? But it's cool because it shows you where you can go. It makes it quite easy. It's you can move here. And then once you get in check, it's like, no, you can't touch anything else. You got to fix this. So it's adorable, actually. And now I'm so bored in. I'm like, maybe I could get really good at this. That'd be fun. Because Tom is always at me. He's like, you need a game. You need to do something other than just work all the time. So
well, I feel bad because I feel like I got you started smoking cigarettes or something.
I mean, he plays games all the time that are much less edifying than playing chess. But now also my YouTube is now showing me chess videos. So now I'm watching my grandmaster mum snuck into a London chess tournament and
Anna
stuff
Cramling.
like
Yeah,
that.
so Pia Cramling is the mom, I assume.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
all the
so Anna
grandmasters.
Cramling is the one I mentioned the other day, who's like very smart and quite good. I mean, quite good for not being a grandmaster, but also like savvy as a streamer in a way that is like,
Oh,
like
yeah.
just
Like,
clarifying to me how bad I am at this.
do you guys like mandarins, that thing?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Right. Like
Okay.
she's very clever, but and even like how she will pitch each individual video, where you'll like the theme of her premises is very often like, this man was arrogant at me in a bar, and then I showed him a lesson. And then you watch the video, and he's like, well, no, this guy's quite understanding. And that, like they actually had a lovely conversation. But, like she took one line he said and sort of
Yeah, yeah.
created it.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
this is the difference between us and YouTubers is we would never lie in such a way in our titles. We would never do that. But
Yeah,
I'm so bought into
yeah.
this world now, like after 45 minutes of watching videos, and particularly this whole like Dingley Wren is chill
Oh,
meme.
he is very. It's funny because it's misleading slightly because it's not quite that he's like unflappable, because he's extremely flappable. Like you watch him during a game and he's all nerves, like he's coughing and rubbing his face, and he like looks terrible even when he's winning. Like
Yeah.
even when he looks like a total nervous wreck no matter what. So it's not that he has a poker face, it's just that he does have this sort of mode of being very much not of the world. I think that's part
Yeah.
of it. Just
Yeah.
completely not of this world. He was asked like what made the big difference before he won this match recently, and he said, "Well, I had a cup of coffee before the game."
It's so
They're
cute.
like, "Wait, you don't normally?" He was like, "Oh, I don't drink coffee. I had a cup of coffee for the game."
That seems like wildly dangerous to do if you don't drink coffee and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, you know what I'm going to do? So, can you explain the whole memification of him for the listeners who won't know what the hell we're on about?
Not entirely, but because I had to learn some of it. So there was apparently so in Mandarin there is a word that sounds like Bing Chilin, which means ice cream. And John Cena apparently years ago stuck his foot in his mouth by referring to Taiwan as a country
Oh,
in the midst of promoting some big action movie. And as one has learned, because a huge market for any mainstream movie is China, the slightest deviation from like Chinese Communist Party propaganda can cause a huge problem. And so then there is a truly cringe-inducing video that he released of him speaking sort of impressive, so to my ear, like impressive sounding Mandarin while eating an ice cream cone, and he keeps referring to Bing Chilin. And so then this became a meme of him, both like that he was sort of eating shit and that he was kept saying this phrase Bing Chilin. And so then that became a meme. And then Ding, who is the current world champion in chess, there sort of some meme evolved out of references to him chilling, which again, he's not. It's not that he's a particularly chill guy, but then the payoff was that he had no like not only had he not heard of any of this, but it was impossible to explain to him what it meant, and his responses are so winningly guileless and like he's just like he is a true genius, but he's also has no there seems to be no filter and no ability to be coy or cunning in any way. He referred to like he missed a capture where he could have traded a knight for a rook, which is like devastating in a great game between grandmasters. And he referred to somebody brought this up afterward, and he said, "Oh, I missed it. I didn't see it." And at the time, it was because he technically like the better move was actually just pushing a pawn, but it was like a move. It was basically like a delicious, treat sitting right in front of you, and no human being could possibly resist grabbing it. And he just said, "Oh, I didn't didn't see it. And when asked about it later, Magnus Carlsen said, like, oh, I completely believe him. Like, I don't think he was being coy. I don't think he was trying to, I don't think he's capable of that. I think he's just says exactly what he's thinking, and what he's thinking is the purest thought that has ever passed through a human mind.
Yeah, it's so endearing. And when he gets asked about this meme, a woman gets up in the Q&A and says, are you aware of this? You're being memeified. Everyone's talking about ding chilling. It's something to do with ice cream. And he asks for a bunch of explanation. And then at the end, he just says, I didn't eat ice cream here. And that's the end of the interview.
He thinks he's sincerely answering the question to the best of his ability. I mean, yeah.
There's the language barrier as well, obviously, but God, he's so
endearing. Yeah. Well, and for him in particular, it's the slang barrier.
Yeah.
But he has a pretty good functional understanding of English, but only if it's very literal. The other competition as the match goes on is at every press conference, you see like tiny chess news outlets from all over the world, like clearly like their whole outfit like saved up to send them to Singapore for one day to observe one game and then ask one question. And they get up there and you can see it from a mile away how they're like flubbing it, because either the question is like, are you happy you won, or are you sad you lost? Or they try to get cute and they bring in some sort of slang. And then this was by far the most gratifying interaction, because typically there will be a 30-second question asked by like some desperate Swede who's, here for one day. And then Ding will sort of look down and then say, no. And that's the end of the exchange. You get nothing else. They move on.
Yeah, these press conferences seem to be a big part of it. I didn't realize, but now I've got all these mashup videos of like grandmasters being savage for 8 minutes straight and things like that. Like, wow. So, do you want to give us the latest? I'm so bought in. I need to know what's happening on this.
Yeah, I'll give you I'll try to give a very, very brief summary, and I'll also try to like point a little bit towards something that I think does kind of come up in this essay we're going to talk about. Because before I came up here, Joanna said, oh, too much chess and SLEERICKETS. Let's get rid of that chess. No more chess. So I don't want to over.
Okay. Well, I'm of a different opinion, but maybe I'm in the minority. I don't know.
I think my guess is that anytime I hear anybody say anything about the show, I assume that represents a number of people who are not speaking up. Because like most people, the normal human thing is not to comment on a show you listen to. But like, so anybody who does is sort of like has to represent some group. But so it's currently locked up. I thought it would be over by now, but I was wrong, because I forgot they do rest days. So every 3 games they do a rest day. It's a 14-game match for the world championship in chess. It's Ding Liren, the current world champion, against Gukesh Domoraju, or Gukesh D, as he's sort of universally called. They are both extraordinary players, but Gukesh is 18 years old, which is, he's the youngest person ever to compete in one of these. And Ding everybody seems to agree, has sort of personally peaked. He certainly has had a bad year and a half or so. And even before, like, COVID seems to have been the turning point, and he has had a bad run. But and his prediction was that he would lose this match, and he would possibly lose badly. And that was the universal consent. Like, everybody agreed Gukesh was going to win this match and probably dominate it. And that is not what's happened. They have each won 2 games now, and the rest have been draws. So it was a Ding won, a draw, Gukesh won, 7 draws in a row. And then Gukesh won a game, and there was effectively a coronation, because it was the 11th game in the match. It was, the rule had become draws, and he was the young challenger. He had been the favorite all along. It was a brutal game to watch. I mean, it was really excruciating, partly because they both traded off being better at different points, and then like having a win. Basically, like it would be like if the score fluctuated wildly in a game, where like if you were playing a soccer game where like one team scored and then the other team scored 2 goals in a row, and then the other team scored 2 goals. And it was sort of like, it's not just that it's sort of neck and neck. It keeps flipping as to who's inevitably going to win. Ding played a very bad game and lost in a kind of a like crushing way. And he was totally shaken afterward. And they like honored him at the press conference and then dismissed him. And then it was this total joyous coronation for Gukesh. Just like, Indian reporter after Indian reporter lining up the microphone to congratulate him. And then the next game, to Gukesh's enormous credit, he played a fighting game. Like the norm with grandmasters, particularly at this level, is like, unless you really think you have a shot at winning and you need to win, you draw. And it's possible to play in a way that basically locks up the board and shuts down. Like you can't win that way, but you can shut down your opponent's ability to win. And Gukesh played fighting chess. He went into a line that was not a drawish line. Like which I have enormous respect for. That he is somebody. He's honors Vishwanathan Anand, who is the previous Indian world champion, amazing player. But his role model is Bobby Fischer, who, in addition to being a genius and a huge asshole, was famous specifically for hating the development of modern chess, particularly with computers, that have led to memorization being a colossal part of the game. And so Fischer even invented a form of chess in which it's impossible to memorize openings because the back row is randomized. And so Gukesh says he wants that. He wants to play basically like it would be possible for them to memorize openings such that they could just lock up the game and that would be it. The way you can win is actually by playing a suboptimal move in the opening. But the goal is to play a suboptimal move, which, in order to beat it, you would have to make a series of insanely counterintuitive moves in a row. And that way you throw off the balance, you break things open, and then you can really go after your opponent. Gukesh played a smart opening that was a challenging opening. Ding had the white pieces, which means it should have been his game. He should have taken him a minute and a half to play the first 15 moves. He was out of prep in move 2. And he spent like an hour within the first 5 or 10 moves of the game. He spent an hour of his 2 hours of time. And he played a perfect game. He was out of prep. He had to calculate every move. He didn't have anything memorized. And he just happened to play a perfect game of chess. And basically, it was like watching somebody get run over by a bulldozer, or by a steamroller. It was that slow and that inevitable. And kind of amazing to watch. I've definitely been rooting for Ding all along because partly because he's the underdog despite being the champion, and partly because he is a colossal pessimist. The other thing that happened in that Ding Chilling press conference that really struck a chord for me, and that I think is maybe relevant to this article as well, is that it became apparent how the two of them, like how they are flawed as calculators. Every calculator other than a computer is flawed, obviously, but they're both insanely good at it. But as you're imagining not just one possible line, 10 moves down, but 10 possible lines, 10 moves down, there are certain possibilities you're not going to see. It's inevitable. And as they were talking through the game and looking at different lines, the theme of all of those draws, by the way, was that Ding would be in a winning position, and then he would offer a draw, and then Gukesh would decline the draw, despite being in a losing position. So they were both doing the opposite of what they should have done. And that's what came out in watching them review these games, is that Gukesh can't see his opponent's strengths in the future. Like when he imagines future positions, he can only imagine his own opportunities and his own strengths. He keeps imagining himself to be better off than he is, and he keeps imagining future lines that are winning for him. Ding can't see his own strengths. He can only see how he could lose in the future. And it is like there are benefits to both of those biases, but it does seem like probably one of it is ultimately better to believe that you're going to win wrongly, right? Like probably that is ultimately better. And part of it may be youth, who knows, but until Ding won back this most recent game, I was very fearful that this match would just be the inexorable triumph of optimism over pessimism.
Yeah, right.
There are two more games to go, so who knows? It could go one way or the other. But yeah, that bias was what really leapt out at me.
And this is probably why when Ding gets asked, "How did you win?" he says, "I was just lucky," because he's
Yeah, by
thinking
chance.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm just so bought in, as I said. I need him to win.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's I mean, and to be clear, like Gukesh is extremely charming and winning, and part of what is also like amusing and kind of like heart wrenching about that press conference is everything Ding does not get, Gukesh gets. Like I mean, like not in a mean way, but like he's laughing because he completely understands. He's 18, he's fluent in English, he's a Zoomer, and he's with it. I mean, he's of the time, and Ding is really a little bit a man out of time and space. But that just makes me root for him all the harder.
Yeah, completely. Um, do we want to move to this article yet, or do you have more to report from the
I
field?
could talk about this stuff all day. Like I've watched a lot of chess in the last couple of weeks. Like I could talk about this for a long time, but I also don't want to overload people. I'm trying to think of like other like not exclusively chess relevant things that leapt out at me. Yeah, I mean, I've learned things, and I have. It has been interesting watching. So one thing, I sent you a video about Judith Polgar, who's the best woman player of all time, amazing, and also just like delightful personality, like very fun to watch. She always like looks like she just rolled out of bed with like a 20-year-old Eastern European rugby player. And she's
100%. I looked at her and I'm like, this woman's someone to give you the best hangover of your life. Like she's
oh
just
yeah, yeah, and she
wonderful.
sort of has one of these personalities that feels like it's universally flirtatious. Like
Yeah.
she, while also getting the better of you, but it's sort of making it fun in the meantime.
Yeah.
Part of what's sort of lovely about her is that she talks about like she does what Magnus Carlsen and Gary Kasparov do, and like Anish Giri did until a couple of years ago, which is every everything that happens reminds them of their own brilliance. Like she, like she'll be like, this game reminds me of a time in 2002 I beat Gary Kasparov. He looked very foolish, and I punish him in the opening. And it's like that wasn't what we were talking about. That didn't come up at all. But she's, like she brags honestly, like she brags like a man in a way that's kind of endearing. Again, like Kasparov is not charming. He's a genius. He's amazing. He's one of the best players of all time. Not charming. She's very, very winning, and so she can sort of do it with a wink in it, and you love her for it. It has been interesting seeing Anish Giri was somebody who I thought of as being very, very arrogant. I mean, also amazing super grandmaster. One of the, I think he's still ranked like 20 in the world or something, but he seems to have peaked. Like a few years ago, he was maybe 6 in the world, 4 in the world, whatever it was, and he seems to have peaked a little bit. And he is infinitely more watchable and likable since becoming like substantially humbler. He's still, an incredible player, an incredible insight, but you just see like the way that he's softened a little bit with age and become self-deprecating, and it's both charming and it makes me oddly sad in a way. Like I definitely didn't enjoy him before, and I do enjoy him now, but like part of me, having never had that, part of me likes to believe that it exists somehow, or like that it can be credible, or like I kind of like to imagine that Gukesh, even when he's Ding's age, will still have his fundamentally optimistic outlook.
Yeah, that it's something that the writer of this article says. He talks about the possibility of a painless existence, like the fact that you could just go through life and it wouldn't grind you down in this way, it wouldn't take away that endless optimism and the arrogance that comes with it.
Yeah, yeah, no,
But it's just endlessly fascinating because this article is about tennis. Obviously, we're talking about chess. Like both these games are you and your mind versus the other person and their mind. Like it's so psychological. You have to rely on your mental stamina and your ability to not just melt down. And I find that because my favorite tennis player was Amelie Mauresmo,
Okay.
obviously because she's
Hold on,
an
sorry.
insanely
Hold
hot.
on. Oh, hey, Ellie, we just saw you got to stop shuffling and banging. It's making a lot of sound. Okay.
Oh,
Just,
Ellie's there.
I know
I
she's
didn't
not
know
supposed
she
to be
was
up.
there.
I know she shouldn't be, but she's so maybe you can stay in here a little bit, but you can't be all those moving things in and out of boxes makes a lot of noise. Okay, baby. All right, I love you, Sil. I'm gonna put you in bed in just a minute. Sorry, you were telling me about a hot tennis player.
Yeah. So, yeah, my favorite tennis player was Amelie Mauresmo. This is back in the 90s because she was an out lesbian when that was not really the done thing. She was tall, she had this huge shoulders, she was just gorgeous, like knee weakeningly gorgeous. But she
Mm,
would get in a winning position and melt the fuck down, and it was horrible to watch. And I would just like being, I guess, 9 or 10 at that point, I would just like watch her just kind of, like as a kid, you'll watch the TV from over your shoulder, like grabbing onto a part of the couch, just like, is
yeah,
this
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
be
yeah.
okay?
You're trying to hold
Um,
on to the handle while you're in the car. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's right. You're just like, this is all gonna go so wrong. Um, and I don't actually know what ended up happening to her, but she was one of those players, like the guy who writes this article, who just particularly when she was winning, she couldn't handle it. She couldn't handle the winning
Yeah.
position. She couldn't handle the pressure of seeing the trophy
Yeah.
in the
Like there are
distance.
people whose talent or discipline fails them, but then there are also people whose sort of nerve or psyche fails them, and it's a slightly
Yeah.
different thing.
Yeah, and I find that completely fascinating. And I was hopeful reading this article, which is called Notes on Losing by J. Caspian Kang in the New Yorker, came out May 2023. I was hopeful that he was going to talk about this because he starts out by saying, I try to play tennis every day, but almost never win, nor do I ever really believe that I will. What does all my losing say about me? And it's a classic New Yorker article in that it's too short and he doesn't answer the question that he sets out to
Right.
answer.
I think I have an answer though that seems like strange. Yeah, like I've a strange thought of it, but I wanted to ask you what your experience. Thank you, baby. Thank you. I'm calling my daughter baby. But um, uh, yeah, I wanted to ask what your experience with tennis is. So you did watch it as a kid. Did you play it at all? Did you?
I was sent to tennis camp probably at 8, which was an exercise in standing out in the sun and then having the tennis coach, when he got sick of us, just lob the balls outside of the court and making us run after them to pick them up. So I hated all physical exercise. I was a chubby kid, hated exercise, and was not good at any kind of sport. I kind of got okay at soccer for a little while, around about 11 or 12, but then other girls started to bully me, so I stopped doing that as well. Yeah, not a tennis player, but I love watching tennis. I adore watching tennis.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, soccer similarly was like that, and a little bit of wrestling. Like where they were like the two things where trying really hard can make something of a difference, even if you have
Yeah.
no physical talent. Which
Yeah,
so like
just
I won a lot of coaches awards. you know, well,
yeah, I
I don't
think
know
I
if
might have
they
won one of
exist in
those
Australia in
too.
the same way, but it's like it's definitely they're like, boy, boy, did you hustle? Boy, if you had any talent, you would be really good.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that was
Yeah.
my experience
Uh,
with tennis, basically sitting in the lounge room, clutching the arm of the couch, hoping that Amelie Mauresmo would win and wondering why I had all these strange feelings about her. So, yeah.
so the okay. It was instructive in a couple of different directions. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing I had previously heard about tennis, and the thing I'm too ignorant to actually know of, like my knowledge of tennis is being married to Joanna, who's actually quite a good tennis player, and then in it's summer camp, I remember going to a like tennis was one of the activities you could rotate to during the day. And I remember going to tennis once as one of the activities, and the I was one of the older kids at that point, and I just remember the counselor in charge of it asked how often I played at home, and I said, "Oh, I've never." picked up a racket before. And his response was like, well, why are you here? Like,
Oh,
what is the point of you even being here? And what I didn't understand then, because, and I sort of nominally tried to play the game a little bit and it was nothing. It was just me swinging a racket and the ball going in the wrong way. But what, what I later at least gleaned he was talking about was this question of muscle memory, that obviously muscle memory is important in all athletics, but my understanding has been that it has a sort of a special keenness in tennis, that like the specific correctness of a swing and just the way in which that's like purely ingrained in your myelin sheaths without you having to think about it. It's like that's like the baseline. That's like the ante to get into the game at all. Like Joanna, whenever we watch a movie, watching like athletic. Often, like a lot of like movie actors are actually quite athletic. They're often in very good shape, and many of them played a lot of sports. Watching like athletic, physically gifted people swing a tennis racket wrong makes her crazy. What I've gathered is like you can't take tennis lessons for a couple weeks and then swing a racket correctly. Like you have to drill that and make that skill part of your blood before like she's not going to notice you. Like I can see you swing it in a movie and I won't see the difference, but for her it's like it's like just screaming out at her. She can't. It's too obvious that you've never actually swung a racket in a real way before. So that has been my sense of tennis. Like that was the thing I think I had most heard emphasized about tennis specifically as a sport. This has been a very different focus in the game. So I'm curious, like how your sense of those things, like how big a part of tennis is the mental game? How much of it is keeping a level head or not having a psychic crack or meltdown?
well, it must be because, like you're saying, you have to sort of drill to get the shots to go where you want them to go reliably. But it must be like 80, 90% when you get out there. I mean, I'm just speculating. I wouldn't have a clue, but I imagine that being able to access that muscle memory, it could get quite interrupted, particularly when you're playing a grand slam or like a game in front of a large crowd. Like we have the Australian Open here in Melbourne, and we go down and wander around the courts, and like it's chaos down there. Like it's total madness. I don't know how um, they keep cool heads, and I guess that's part of being a tennis personality. Also, is that you don't necessarily keep a cool head, and you get to throw your racket onto the ground, which seems quite fun.
That is like that's part of tennis in a way
It's
that I
part of
don't
tennis.
think is being part of a lot of other professional, like at the professional level, professional tennis players pretty regularly will throw tantrums in a way that I don't think of a lot of other athletes or competitors doing that. Like typically, like that's something you associate with like total amateurs, right, or children, right, playing a sport. Like lots of us has gotten frustrated. Like certainly, I've gotten frustrated being bad at something, but like the true professional still will even like that tells you something, I guess, about the nature of the game.
Yeah, and about that mental pressure that just must be so, so intense. But also, I guess it's part of the performance. Like there's an acceptability to that because I
Right,
guess
right, right,
John McEnroe
right.
did
Yeah,
it, and
yeah,
now
yeah.
everyone's like, oh, well, I'm going to be like him. I like this
Like soccer
paragraph.
players taking a dive, like professional soccer players will like act like babies if they get touched on the field because like that the performance is part of the game.
Yes, yes,
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
yeah. I wanted to read this paragraph, which I quite liked, about where the writer talks about his particular tantrums. So he's talking about the fact that when he misses a shot, he puts it in the wrong place, he will have an outburst directed toward himself. And he says, the other regulars have never expressed any displeasure with my streams of self-directed profanity, but I'm sure they have their thoughts, all of which are justified. I'm not proud of my behavior, but I also find that I can't quite control myself when I inexplicably whack a sitter into the bottom of the net, or when I stupidly try for a slice shot while my opponent is standing right at the net. The outbursts, usually some variation of, why the fuck are you like this, happen without my consent. I quite like that.
I love that that's what he says because it also feels like it. it takes into account the larger question of like it's not just the game, it's like that he is throwing this tantrum is part of what he is like.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
a question that is asked about itself as well.
You
Uh,
as a whole, your whole personality, why the fuck are you like this? Um, yeah, I don't know. That I wish that
just for
this,
context, like this is a he is a 40-year-old writer who is
yeah,
a total amateur. It's like that's the context in which he's throwing the tantrum. But even if that's not what they're yelling, there are like this is not so far off from professional tennis players' behavior at times. Like I love the example he gives of McEnroe losing a match and then going to the press conference and resigning live at the press conference and saying it's like the best sore loser move I've ever heard, which is I can't like as soon as I lose a match to you, I know there's nothing left. Like I can't have any respect for myself if I could possibly lose a match to you. It's just like just sucking any joy that I could have had out of that match.
yeah, I have to seriously consider what it is I'm doing playing this game, something like that. I mean, and it's funny because yeah. So there's something here about because I did watch that chess grandmasters being savage for 8 minutes thing, and it was very fascinating in the
I haven't seen
context of
that.
what you.
What is it?
Oh, it's just
What
a
is that?
it's just a clip, a YouTube video of clips from chess press conferences. You could probably make one based on tennis as well, but there's something here about what you were talking about a couple of episodes ago in terms of like that ability to be because there's no escaping the merit, like it's just sheer skill.
Yeah,
um that ability to just be like so blunt, so
yeah, yeah,
straightforward.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's no point lying.
It would be meaningless. It would almost like it wouldn't compute.
Yeah, and there's something so brutal about that, but also kind of appealing for a poet who comes from this world of like,
Opposite. That's
yeah,
never. It's like never that. There's no like ounce of that.
no,
Even when something is clearly very bad, almost nobody will ever say that it is in any conflict. Like unless if you're truly it's like unless it's two other people, neither of them the writer of the poem, off at a bar. Like so seldom is there any straight talk about poetry.
yeah. I went to a launch this week. It's December and there's about 1 million events on. And one of them was this launch that I went to. And there's a tiny shade of this. Sydney crowds at poetry events clap after every poem. In
Okay.
Melbourne, for some reason, we only clap if we are moved to. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's,
Which is better. I mean, that's
yeah,
better.
it's like something
Yeah.
slightly more honest about
Clapping
that.
after
But
every poem is insane. That's like a child's reading. That's a crazy person.
sorry, Sydney.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's awful. Sorry, Sydney, you're the worst. That's all. And you're like a major city, and you do this. It's like New York. You don't they don't give like, in any city outside of New York in America. Any stage performance, even truly by inept children, will get a standing ovation. New York,
yes.
nothing gets a standing ovation, and I have enormous respect for that. It makes me only want to see plays in New York.
I find the standing ovation thing in the US really mystifying.
It's become inflation to a point where it's just like I can't even see anything. Just why are we all like you're kidding me? You're kidding me. You like it's not even that like I know this wasn't the best show you've seen in anything like recent memory, but like you don't even think you're convincing the actors that you think it's the best show you've seen. Like, come on, who believes this?
But it's like an arms race thing, right? Like if you don't stand up, it's like an expectation now that
Oh,
everybody will stand
I
up.
definitely frequently make Joanna unhappy by not standing up during standing ovations. Like I've definitely like she's like not happy to be there with me when I'm the one person who's like, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to do it. I just can't. This was a even if it's like this was a good show, but like, come on, come on.
Yeah, so that kind of dishonesty, that like built-in dishonesty is so exhausting and like eats away at you, I find anyway.
Sorry, I jumped in. You said that you saw there was a moment of honesty.
Well,
with
I liked that. I was reminded of the fact that we don't necessarily clap after every poem. And I was like, okay, well, this is a nice little nod to like, we like this poem better than that other poem. At least there's some admission that some poems are better than others. That was kind of, yeah, I thought that was a positive thing. But then, of course, the reading ends and everybody starts circulating and chatting, and that's where the real performance starts. I feel for me, and for everybody else, I'm sure. But I feel it acutely. Maybe I don't. Maybe I feel at the same degree that everybody else does. But it just leaves me feeling that kind of hey, oh my God, so good to see you. Trying to think of their name, trying to think of the last thing of theirs that you read or like something to talk about, trying to account for yourself, which I find extremely hard. What have you been up to? What have you been writing? No fucking idea how to answer any of that. I leave feeling just so depleted, so lonely, and like I've basically been lying to people's faces for 45 minutes or however long I can stand it. And I know I'm not alone in this. I know this is not like, yeah, I know this
no,
is
no,
not
no, no.
even.
Like your average poetry reading has the energy of a Christian singles mixer. Like there's such a like implicit desperation to every interaction that just feels like we all like. And I'm just like it's like the worst kind of smug married thing. But like there's like I remember being a kid and being at the church late one night, and there was like a singles mixer, and I just remember this feeling is as I like passed through the room of like having to commit to a bit, having to commit to like
Mm-hmm.
we feel good about being here. This is yes, this is like it's meaningful for us to be doing this.
Yeah,
And,
it's
and
meaningful.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I cannot imagine. I mean, at least at the Catholic mixers, there was booze. I cannot imagine like a Baptist singles mixer. It would be deadly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's still value in people getting together to read and listen to poetry and to meet other poets. I think it is not entirely a waste of time. In fact, I think it's probably essential in some regards, but I have to take it in very small doses. Like
We
I
do it
say no to
badly.
heaps of stuff.
Yeah, we just do it badly. We just don't do it well. I think like single people should get together and make out. Like I think that's great. Like I don't think that's weird. I just think like there's something about the way we do it where we don't do it well.
Well, it's also just like, because I'm trying to think, okay, well, what would you change then? But one of the things that you need to change is like you need trust. You need trust
Yeah.
between the people in that room, and there's never going to be, because you're all competing in some way for attention, for clout, for, oh, that person said hi to me, that person didn't say hi to me, that sort of stuff. And, you know, I kind of felt this the other day because I go to this little kind of reading circle and it can feel sort of hard sometimes. But this time I stayed all the way to the end until everybody but me and the host and one other poet was there. And then the tenor of the conversation changed entirely. And we all stopped trying to impress each other. And we started talking honestly about the work that we had spent the afternoon reading. And I was like, this is wonderful. Wow. Like
Yeah.
I didn't even know you guys were here. Like I didn't realize you felt this way. And I didn't leave that feeling lonely and isolated and ground to a fine dust.
No, that's invigorating.
It's
When you can tap
great.
into that, that's wonderful.
It's great. I didn't even know it was there. And it was just the fact that I just sat on the couch long enough to be around for that.
Yeah, I got lunch a few years ago with a poetry professor here, and I talked to him at a lot of readings and social events with lots of other poets, and uh, he's a lovely guy and very very charming, and loves poetry, genuinely loves poetry. But like most of these encounters were in settings in which we were all cheerfully boosting somebody's poetry. And then I had lunch with him once. He was on sabbatical, he just, he has a carol at the library that he likes to go to. And he came to meet me for lunch and a drink. And I said, well, what have you been up to? He said, I don't have anything I need to do. I don't have anything to do. I don't have any papers. I'm totally free. So I'm just reading Donald Justice. Mm. And like the conversation we had then was like, you love poetry. Like, we can actually just talk about you love poetry and nobody's asking you to do anything. Nobody's looking. So you can just read poetry you actually love. Mm. And then we can talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, like we can be honest and we have a basis on which to trust each other. Like, I find that even conversations I have with people I really like here, like, we can't say the thing. And if we can't do that, we have no basis for a relationship of any kind, I feel. And it's disheartening.
In those conversations, I'm curious because I definitely like know what you're talking about, I think, and like I definitely share that feeling intuitively and know what you're talking about. But I also am curious for you, when you have one of those conversations, what sort of thing would the thing be, right? If there's like a thing you can't say, like what would that sound like? What would that be? Would that be a comment of like, would that be a frank criticism of the other person's poetry? Would that be just an observation about something you do or don't like that's praised in public? Or what would that sound like?
I think for me, like the interaction I'm thinking of, what I wanted to say on that occasion was, I really don't think that person's work has any value to it. Yeah. And it's not something that I would want to say publicly. It's not something that I would want, like, I don't necessarily think that criticism is particularly valuable, but just the ability to start a conversation where we were both operating from a place of, this is what I actually think.
Right.
And it's funny because
we were all just pretending just now, right? Like we were all just pretending that was good. We were on the same page. Yeah.
Yeah. And the pretense leads to places. It leads to,
yeah.
And I've participated in perpetuating the pretense in my own small way.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too.
I'm really aware of that. So, and I think that is like, it's part of it. We don't necessarily need to aim for chess grandmaster levels of honesty in poetry, right. But I suppose I'm just saying all this to say, thank God for conversations like the ones I get to have with you and with other people through this show that I've met through this show, where I actually get to say what I think, and I don't feel like I'm then going to get in trouble from somebody, or I'm going to lose something. I can just have a straightforward conversation. Like, that's essential. I feel like that's essential. Otherwise, you can't keep going if you're just lying all the time.
No, I mean, as you said, it does wear away at you, that kind of playing along and pretending. It really does it takes a toll.
It takes a toll. It really does.
I was curious because I had a funny moment reading through this essay, and there's a lot in here that I'm interested in, but he has this sort of, he bookends the essay with this encounter he has with a poet who's a 70-year-old amateur tennis player and who wipes the floor with him, who's very, very good. I mean, who's very good, at least comparatively, but even more so, like, loves playing, seems to love competition, really loves to win, is gracious about it, but like, that's what he's there for. He's there to compete and to win. And it turns out this guy's a poet. And then he has this little brief conversation with him toward the end where he complains a little bit about the state of poetry right, today. What is the line? The form, he said, was in bad shape these days. And he has a specific complaint, which we can talk about. And off mic, you had some speculation. And I had a couple of thoughts about it. But the thing I was more curious about is that later he said, that night I read some of the poet's work. I read this next sentence the first time I read it as, I'm reading prose by a guy who writes prose in a magazine, nonfiction prose, right? I read it that way. And then I stopped and I thought back over it and read it a different way. So that night I read some of the poet's work. It contains beautiful descriptions of sunlight, which illuminate a series of small scenes. A young couple walking to a general store in December, a group of friends sharing a meal in the backyard, a man reminiscing about his family farm. The poems are nostalgic in tone and seem to reach for something that has long since passed. That's a two sentences. And he goes on to do a little speculation. I think he sort of has a nice closing line about it. But I was curious how you received his description of the old man's poetry.
I thought it was faint praise. Like I thought it was like he's a nice old guy and he writes this kind of poetry that you would expect, and it's a bit bland.
But it's also not what you would it's not it doesn't line up with the guy as a tennis player, right? Because as a tennis player, he's very straightforward, very clear cut, and like there, like he's competitive. He likes to play competitively in the 70+ league, and he's not a pro, but he takes it pretty seriously, and he's pretty hardline about it. It doesn't sound like that's like I'm totally am with you. It definitely struck me as faint praise. It also it made me think like, okay, what would be the alternative? Like, what's a different kind of reaction one could imagine J. Caspian Kang having as like an educated guy who's clearly a reader or writer, who bothers to go look up the guy's poetry and read some of it. Not somebody who is in the poetry world, not somebody who maybe reads a lot of poetry, outside of his schooling. What would be the better version of that? Like, what would be the version one would even hope for?
Well, it's interesting because it's framed in contrast to the poetry that this poet tennis player is complaining about, the poetry written by the current poet laureate of California, who has to be Lee Herrick. And the complaint that the tennis player poet has is if the value of the writer's words, so this isn't Lee Herrick's words, if the value of the writer's words had been replaced by an almost algorithmic prediction of who might make the best celebrity. So this is a kind of pretty savage swipe here.
Yeah, but also very much the kind of thing a lot of poets will say when very far away from a microphone.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it makes it all the way into the New Yorker. So I'm not a genius. It didn't take much for me to figure out who they were talking about in this article. But to get to the point of your question, that the description of the poet tennis player's work, a better version of that could be, it's not fashionable. It's good, but it's not fashionable. And I can see why he's angry, because he's writing this kind of stuff that is not going to make you a poet laureate of a state. It's not going to win you any prizes. And I understand what's driving him on the tennis court now, because his time has passed as a writer.
Do you think that your average educated non-poet, like person of letters, but not a poet, do you think your average person like that would, when reading a contemporary poet's work, like a living poet's work, would, if he liked it, would say, it was good, it wasn't fashionable? Like, I mean, he might not say it wasn't fashionable because he might not know what is fashionable, but I don't even know if I would trust him to say that it was good. Like, I mean, not that I would trust your average poet to say that, except mostly dishonestly, but like, it's hard to imagine. It would be one thing if you met this guy at his university job, and then you went and you saw him on the tennis court, and you said like, oh, he's good. Like, Robert's quite, like, he plays tennis quite well. Like, he was beating this guy 30 years younger than him. The converse is almost impossible to imagine. Like, what would it be? What would he be saying when he said it was good? Would it be, unless he felt like he had enough expertise in poetry to render a verdict, and, was the kind of person who either likes to lie about other people's poetry being good, or actually like feels, confident enough to make those kind of genuine verdicts in public? I don't know. Like, I could imagine him saying it was pretty. I could imagine him saying like, some of it made me laugh, some of it it surprised me. I found myself remembering little bits of it. It wasn't what I expected, but I think like the state of poetry is such, like, I don't know that people even feel confident recognizing merit if they think it's there. Like,
Well,
like
yeah.
we don't even know what it is.
Yeah, this kind of goes to your brilliant breakdown of those articles about AI and poetry.
Oh
Like,
God.
what do people even recognize as good in poetry? It gets so confused and difficult because this world where you can discuss merit straightforwardly, bluntly, this chess world or even the tennis world,
Yeah.
like you can just see the huge distance between that and the world that we're operating in, where even if we were really great, like like you've said a million times, even if you win a prize, that doesn't, how do you
Oh, it
know what
means
that
nothing.
means? Yeah.
Nothing. I mean, I did think that, like, the algorithmic prediction of who might make the best celebrity, that felt like a jest. I mean, it made me wonder, like, how much of a quotation is that? Like, is that J. Caspian Kang rounding off something the guy said, or because it
Yeah.
feels to me that feels like that doesn't quite ring true. It sounds like something in the vague direction of something that might be more true, but like that doesn't seem quite right. Like, I don't think that's quite what's happening.
Yeah, I think he's protecting the poet in that moment. I think the poet probably said something quite a lot more distasteful.
Do you think he said something like unwoke? Like, is that what you mean?
Probably.
Like,
Yeah, I
yeah, yeah,
reckon.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe in I don't know, in Berkeley, like in Berkeley, I don't know how like I was gonna say, like a tennis court in like Raleigh, North Carolina. Probably, they'd probably be blunt in a certain kind of way, but like I don't know, like a poetry professor in Berkeley. Maybe what I wonder is, like, how honest was the poetry professor being? Like, it's like Freud has that thing where it's like, is your dream a distorted vision of your fantasy, or is your memory of your dream a distortion of what was like a graphically, explicitly, horny or horrifying vision? And
Mm.
here it's like, is the poet mincing his words, or is J. Caspian Kang mincing his words? It must be to some extent the poet, because Yang says that his response is, I assured him that I had never heard of the poet laureate, so he didn't need to worry about the celebrity part. This didn't seem to satisfy him, which makes sense. It makes sense because that's not really what he's talking about. It's not really about celebrity. It's like poet celebrity, which is why, like, that's not the question. That's not what's happening,
Mm.
algorithmically or otherwise.
Yeah, it raises a lot of questions, this paragraph. And to me, this seems like another case of, there's an article in here that you actually wanted to write, but you didn't get to write it. I really want to talk to this poet. I want to know who he is.
Oh, I definitely want to know who he is, and what he do you think. Well, here's another question, because the poet seems like I don't know, it's like a combination of a certain kind of, I don't know if you've encountered this thing where there's like there is a type of response that I will sometimes see. It often correlates to university professors, but not always, where like they will let their guard down and speak in the way that they would only speak in private, and even then it feels like they've got the bumpers and the gutters. Like, even then you're not actually. It's like their mind won't allow them to think in a frank way somehow.
Yeah, there's always an
Like,
audience.
they know enough to know there's something that they're being dishonest about. There's something that they're being in bad faith about, or they're kind of like, well, we're being polite. But it's like they can't even actually reckon with what that is. And so they come up with something that's sort of like, well, that's not like, that's not really what the problem is. What do you mean? What do you think the poet thought? Assuming he read this, I don't know whether that's an assumption to make or not. But if the poet read this article, how do you think he read J. Caspian Kang's faint praise of him? Do you think he read it
I
in the praise that it clearly is?
I don't see how you couldn't. I mean, if I were this poet and a New Yorker staff writer has gone off to read my work and then writes about it in the closing paragraph of his article and doesn't include anything complimentary at all.
Well, he says he writes it contains beautiful descriptions of sunlight. Like part of what struck me about this, like this was a moment where he stopped sounding to me like it sounds to me like the way people mince words when they're talking about poetry, in that I mean, it reminds me of my like a lot of my own old reviews, which is like, I am going to describe this very accurately, and I will take pains to provide a complimentary adjective where accurate. It does seem to me like people are often very have a very hard time remembering how dishonest they are about other people's work when it comes to their own work. I find myself I try, again, like I try to avoid this, but like if somebody says something nice to me about my work, I feel the sort of like the circuit in my brain go like, that's nice. Oh wait, it's a person choosing to say this. Okay, right. Like, this, like, you need to recontextualize all this. It's like a thing somebody's choosing to say, and therefore, like, it's not. I shouldn't like read it as a fact from the universe. I should read it as like a decision somebody made.
Well, but this is hard though. This kind of brings me to something else. Like I was so happy in your episode that you did 3 or so weeks ago that you shared the link to that poem that you published in First Things because I would never have seen it otherwise. I'm sorry, First Things, but I'm
No,
not
you're not in the
reading.
Catholic mafia.
But it's a wonderful poem. Now, if I say that, I I very much want you to take it as a genuine compliment, but I also understand because I'm very much the same way how hard that is to do. Like I really get it. But it's tough because a lot of us listeners, we really like your poetry, but we feel like we can't say it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, but this is like you. This is also true of like the like truly exquisitely beautiful like handmade chapbook that you sent me, which is also extraordinarily like the poetry is also quite beautiful. But it's like that's a like, and I wrote you a note about it, and I reread it since then, and I mean to continue rereading it. But like, there's nothing I can say to you about this that will communicate to you like it will be impossible for you because of the context. It will be impossible for you to hear in like without some sort of distorting quotation marks that like, oh, I think this is quite well done. Like I just sort of try to accept that like there's a certain field within which it's going to be impossible either to be like even if you can be honest, it's going to be hard to be taken seriously, right? And
Yeah.
so I try to kind of accept that and then just try to find like where can I find like keen, clear honesty outside of that zone?
Mm.
Like I don't I get a little nervous sometimes when people will say like, oh well, your show's all about being really brutally honest, and you're like, I don't, like not, I mean I want to be honest, but also like I live in the world and I have friends, and like I have like I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to be brutal and savage. Or partly, it's not just like that I'm lying; it's that we're not capable even of thinking that way. Like you begin to become you get connected to somebody, and it changes how you read their work, and that's fine. That's okay. But I try to like basically my hope is that I can identify certain zones within which there's going to be. It's not that you can't communicate at all. It's just that everything will be read in a certain atmosphere or in a certain context. And then my hope is just to be able to preserve some regions outside of that where you can have some real clarity. Like I felt bad taking some swings at Annie Finch recently, who's very prominent and a very accomplished poet and critic and editor in a world I'm very much in. But at least at the moment, I sort of have the liberty to do that because I don't know her personally. I don't have any connection to her. I've just read some of her work that I thought was very frustrating. but like, I don't think that's because I'm fundamentally more honest. I think it's like more. I don't know. It's like I'm more isolated in a way. Like you're an interesting case because you seem to have become more willing to be frank as you have also begun to have like deeper and deeper stakes and roots in a poetry community. Like it is increasingly implausible for you to call yourself an outsider in Australian poetry, particularly in Melbourne poetry. You're not, like you have the distinction you made that like you have very few poet friends who are like personal friends. There's a lot of semi-professional career acquaintance people, but like you're increasingly like you're a figure, you're a recognizable person who is recognized by the poetry world. And it's like as you have become less of an outsider, you've become more willing to try to be really clear cut about it, which is like that's to me impressive and also sort of like baffling. Like in a way, like I hope I continue to be able to be enough of a social recluse to like occasionally say something honest about something.
Yeah. I don't really see the point anymore in lying. I think one of the things, like you're right. Oh, I can see Ellie. Sorry, she's just
Yeah,
very distractingly adorable.
no, believe me.
Yeah, you're right. Like it's true. Like I don't want to sandbag. I have the experience now where I walk into a room and like 20 people are like, hey, I
Yeah,
got this big publication this year, a couple of them. Yes, things are going well. I can also see how tempting it would be to just start to play a game.
yeah.
And I don't want that. I don't want it if it's going to come off the back of just dishonesty upon dishonesty. And also,
Yeah.
like, honestly, Matthew, I think it's your, like, I'm sorry, but I think it's your influence. Like, I think I think I just can't, like, there's always you and Josh and Elijah sort of sitting in my head when I'm out at these events, you know?
Yeah, it's a
And you're the
unruly
people I wish I
company.
could talk to as I'm driving home.
Right.
But you're very much with me when I'm there. And so I can't just say, "Oh my God, I love that thing that you published," blah blah blah, when I didn't.
Yeah,
I'm very glad when I can say, like I read Sam Harris's tiny book on lying, which I thought was, I'm sorry, all the Sam Harris fans who I know are listening, but that book's insane. It's
what
like
I don't know about this. What is it?
it's so he wrote this tiny book called On Lying, which is basically his approach to honesty. And he's like, you must be completely honest all the time,
Yeah.
including
Oh God, that's the
if your
worst.
friend asks you if they are fat and they are, you should say yes. And otherwise you are doing them a disservice. And I'm like, that's just stupid. Like, come on. Can you
It's
imagine if we all operated that way? I
horrible. Have you
I
ever
always
been
want to
around somebody who
be,
actually behaves like that? They're insufferable. They're
yeah,
the
yeah.
worst.
It's not just like, oh, this is true and I said it, so therefore go me. It's like, no, but did you hurt somebody in the process? Then you got a mess to clean up. Like, I don't want that. But I also
No,
just
no, no,
don't
no.
want to have the feeling of leaving these events and these interactions feeling like I just wasn't me. I think I'm just more interested in being my actual self because I'm realizing that if I get rewarded for not being myself, then I just feel more lonely. It's funny editing a conversation about honesty. Like, it's a weird process in the first place, but when you're discussing honesty itself, you can't help but ask, how honest were you in this conversation, Alice? My answer is as much as I could be on the fly, on Zoom. I think I'm as relaxed as I've ever been in this conversation. Each time it gets a little more natural, but am I ever really completely honest? I don't know. So there is a second half to this over on The Secret Show, sleerickets.substack.com. You can get a week for free. You can listen to the rest of this conversation for free, but I'm telling you, if you go over there and you subscribe, it doesn't cost very much, and you'll be able to listen to like some insane number of episodes. Matthew has made more episodes than me in like a third of the time. The man's a machine. I don't understand. So head on over there and you can hear us talk about, well, first off, Matthew starts by giving me some quite practical advice that I always need to hear about saying no. We also discuss how not to be Diogenes, what you should even be aiming for when you write a poem, how Matthew started writing the way he writes now, what it is to win ugly in poetry, and poetry truffle pigs. It's well worth your time. Don't forget to send us your AMA questions. Do it now. We want to hear from you. You can reach Matthew, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. You can send your questions there too. Thank you all for listening. And with any luck, we will all be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.